Before FromSoftware was a company catering exclusively to the masochist gamer, they created multiple games with varying amounts of success. While they are now widely known as the creators of hits like Dark Souls and Armored Core and Elden Ring, this wasn't always the case. Back in 2002, a lone developer from the FromSoftware development team lost a game of YuGiOh, and instead of getting good, like their games tell you to, he created the GameCube game Lost Kingdoms, an action-adventure RPG with cards as the main battle mechanic. Now, the part about the YuGiOh duel may or may not be completely made up, but the fact that I played this game a ton as a kid definitely is not. I remember playing the opening section over and over again, but never actually finishing the game. Is that just something that I did as a kid, or did we all do that? Well, today we are diving into this rather unknown game and figuring out if I am simply blinded by my own nostalgia goggles, or if it's actually a good game. I mean, it got a sequel in 2003, so it can't be that bad, right? As you launch the game, you are welcomed by the pre-rendered cutscene that you have been seeing in the background. It shows a good amount of the in-game cards and gives you a bit of a feel in regards to the art style. The opening ends, and after inputting a character name, we get some scrolling text that talks about a black mist that's causing people to disappear. We also hear that the 5 kingdoms got these things called runestones, and are told this black mist might be a sign of an ancient evil reawakening. Now that the tone is set, we move into a short in-game cutscene. I quite like this one as it starts from the point of view of the guards sprinting towards the princess and then moves into third person. Quite a nice touch. Also, it turns out we are the princess of this kingdom. The guard tells us the black fog is at the gate of the castle and we won't be safe for long. King Theobane then speaks to us and tells us that if the castle is ever attacked, we must take the runestone and leave. So, we are now thrown into the game, and we can now freely roam the halls of the castle. Unfortunately, there isn't too much to see, and the game only allows us to move to a single room. In this room is a chest, and we find the runestone we had been told about. Then, before we even get to see what this new item is, we are ambushed by a bunch of skeletons. Good thing we are no ordinary princess, and we know how to fight. Well, sort of. An unknown voice speaks to us and tells us that we are the guardian of the sacred covenant. The power of the cards flows in our blood and we can unleash their power. A card appears in front of us and the skeleton gets blown up. There is, however, still one skeleton remaining and we are thrown into our first battle. We get a quick little tutorial telling us how we can use cards. So, on the right side of the screen, you can see 4 cards corresponding with the 4 buttons on the GameCube controller. Pressing one of these buttons uses the corresponding card. We can also see a card on our left. This is the card that is on top of our draw pile and will be drawn the moment there is a free space in our hand. After the battle is over, we find an old woman who says she is going to help us become the very best like no one ever was. I then skip the dialogue a bit too fast and make editing more difficult for myself, because I recorded this opening section again after already wrapping up the entire playthrough. We get some more information that I'll save for later in this video, and we are thrown to the world map. On the world map, we can select which level we want to go and play. The entire game is broken down into many different levels, and they all take roughly 10 to 15 minutes to complete. This does make it a great game to play in short bursts, as unlike a lot of other RPG games, you don't need to sink multiple hours into this game to make any progress. So, we click on the second level called Plains of Roal, and we meet up with the old lady we saw at the end of the first level. We are told her name is Gerd, and she is going to be teaching us. I quite like the way the game now presents us with an in-game justification for receiving a tutorial to prepare us for the battle system. This is where we find our first chest. These chests are present in every level and generally contain a card for us to use. In this case, we get a Hobgoblin card. We don't know what to do with it yet, so we just proceed. So now for a nice design touch. We just got a Hobgoblin card from the chest, and we enter a combat section shortly after, where we have to fight a Hobgoblin ourselves. This showcases that the cards you get as a player are also enemies in their own right. Good thing we take them out easily by just spamming a bird move. So if you've been paying attention, you will have seen some colored crystals appearing when we either hit or kill enemies. We are now told they are used as a resource to use cards. They are actually called magic stones in this game, but I will be calling them crystals because it's just so much easier. On the top left of the screen, you see a circle with a number in the middle. This number is the total amount of crystals you currently have and serves very similar to a mana system. Meanwhile, every card has a crystal requirement at the top. So, hit enemies with cards to generate crystals to use more cards. So far, a pretty straightforward gameplay loop. One side note is that the crystals do disappear after a while, so you have to be somewhat quick. This promotes aggressive melee range looting, which does put you in harm's way of monsters. So it's a nice balancing act of generating enough crystals while not taking too much damage. We fight our way through some more goblins and find some runestones with more information about the battle system. First off, we are told that each card has a certain element tied to it. The system at play is very similar to Pokemon, where some types are super effective against other types. One of the best design touches in the entirety of the UI comes in here, as when you look at the upper left corner of the screen, you see a circle with the amount of crystals that we talked about earlier, but you also see elemental icons surrounding it. If you read it clockwise, it says water, fire, wood, earth. Each element on the clock is weak to the one before it. So this means fire is weak to water and wood is weak to fire. It's an amazing way to remember which element works best in any given scenario. And to make things even easier, every mob has an elemental typing displayed next to their health. So you can always see at a glance what card would be good to use. Slightly further up on the path, we find a deck point. These fully restore your health and allow you to restock your deck with any cards you have found after starting the level. So the way this game works is that you have a deck limit of 30 cards. You can't take any cards out of your deck during the run, but you can add any cards you found during the level at deck points. Now, why would you want to add cards when you're already starting the level with 30 cards in most later cases? Well, once you've used a card, it is gone for the entire remainder of the level. So, managing your cards so you don't run out of them is a key component when playing Lost Kingdoms. You also have the ability to discard cards in the middle of the fight. This way you can get the next card in line without having to use the crystals on whatever card you are holding. You will not be able to use the discarded card in that fight, but it will return to your deck after the fight is over. We then run into the first boss fight of the game in a sand golem. Nothing too special going on here, but I did actually run out of cards on my first playthrough, so I had to restart the level. I, however, felt like that added to my experience a lot, as from that point onward I paid much more attention to not wasting any of my cards. A lesson best learned as early as possible. We kill the sand golem and are thrown back to the world map. We now have access to the apothecary, which in reality is more like a card shop. Gurt, the old lady from before, runs this store and gives us the ability to buy, sell, transform or copy cards. She also gives us vital story information and serves as a way to get insight into the overarching plot of the game. Gurt tells us that all of Arkville, which is the world we are living in, will fall unless the black fog is stopped by a runestone bearer. I look around the shop and realize I am the only runestone bearer here. Well, I guess my task is clear. Go save the world from fog. Gurt then tells us that our father, King Theobane, has left the kingdom to go seek out King Zelnan in order to work out a shared strategy to deal with the fog. However, he does not have a runestone and thus won't be able to use cards to defend himself. And since we live in the YuGiOh universe where weapons don't exist and every problem in the world is solved through the result of a children's card game, we go after him to try and catch up to him before he gets sent to the Shadow Realm. We start our search for our father in a town called Blasoon. The zone is pretty straightforward, as all we need to do is look for 4 colored braziers to light. Once they are all lit, the main gate opens and we can continue. As we are running around, we do however get random encounters, and I try to manage my card usage well so I don't run out 2 levels in a row. Just past the main gate, we run into one of the game's few NPCs in Alexander. He's a fairy collector that asks us to find as many red fairies as we can. So, let's talk fairies. There are 2 types of fairies in this game, blue ones and red ones. Blue ones are young and full of energy. They float around somewhat fast, and when we run into them, we either get a heal and restore 1 card we have already used, or it's actually a monster in disguise and we get a battle. From my experience, it's mostly the beneficial effect, but a surprise monster here or there can definitely make you sweat, as you just don't want to waste any cards. Then there are also the mature red fairies. They have lived a long life and are more than happy to come with you. When you interact with them, they also share knowledge about the level itself and sometimes even give you more information about the plot. We are told to go collect the red fairies and bring them to Alexander. I really like this system, as the red fairies now serve as both a collectible as well as a source of more information. And with a severe lack of meaningful dialogue after you're done with the early game, having just that little bit of information helps a whole lot. We then fight a rather easy fire golem and wrap up the level. When you complete levels, you get a rating between 1 and 5 stars. Depending on the amount of stars you get to pick from a total of 6 face down cards. If you get the best result in 5 stars, you get to flip 3 cards face up and claim them. If you get a lower amount of stars, you will be able to get less cards at the very end. The chests you open in the level do remain opened, and the more battles you get, the lower your grade. So there is something to be said for running through a level, getting all the chests, only to then abandon the level and run through it more efficiently because you no longer need the chests. This, however, does also mean that you won't have the option to find the cards to add to your deck at deck points. It's a bit of an interesting system that doesn't really come into play until maybe the final level. In this case, we just kill a fire golem and happen to roll his card as well. So this means we can now put him in our deck and use him ourselves. After the level, a new place opens up on the world map where we can go talk to Alexander in his house. By talking to him, we can now donate the red fairies to him, and on certain amounts of red fairies collected in total, he gives us a free card. I would say that is a pretty solid deal, as I want to interact with the red fairies anyway, because they provide level information and lore information when interacting with them. Still on our hunt for our father, we check out the burial grounds. This is where all of the Alanya royal family is buried, which just so happens to be the family we are from. On the tombstones, we get some backstory about previous kings that I would gladly cover here. Unfortunately, it serves as no more than mere backstory and doesn't have any significant relevance to the plot. So, let's talk a moment about where the battles take place. When you get a random encounter in the level, you will be put in a square-looking version of the place you were when you got the encounter. Any destructible terrain like barrels will still be there and can be destroyed for crystals. Sometimes you can even break something in a battle that you would otherwise not be able to break, that now gives you access to a path with a chest. These chests don't contain anything too amazing generally, but are some extra loot for the clever among us. And I guess the stuff outside the battlefield is just the infinite void or something. We then find Lord Unther, a knight of Alanya, who tells us that our father is headed to a place called Grail. Well, let's get out of here then and check out that place next. Near the end of the level, we find one of the trickier obstacles. We find 4 colored runes, and pressing one of them can either start a battle or turn off the rune. We need to figure out what order we have to press them in order to turn them all off. This is mostly a trial and error system that normally would not be a big problem. But keep in mind, however, that every battle we fight burns more cards. And when we do turn them all off, we move straight into a boss fight with a necromancer. One that I did struggle with, as I kept running out of cards before beating him. Definitely a challenging fight relative to anything we've done so far. After beating the necromancer into submission, we return to Gourd, and I check out one of the more interesting things you can do with cards that's not battling. When cards are used in battle, they earn experience. You can see this at the end screen that I skipped past earlier in the video, showcasing the experience gained for the previous fight. A card only gains experience when it dealt the finishing blow to a monster. So you could prepare a monster with other cards and then finish the monster off with the one you want to level. But how does this work for cards that don't deal damage? Well, remember the crystals we have been getting? They give you 1, 3 or 5 of the crystal resource needed to use the cards. But they also give you the same amount of experience to every single card in your deck, whether it was used or not. This is how you level non-combat cards. The experience earned can be spent on one of multiple options. One of them is transformation. This system allows you to transform one copy of a card you own into a different card. In some cases, these are significant upgrades that you will definitely want to grab. Some of them, however, are more side grades and are not necessarily better. They might be better for your deck setup, but could be equal in strength or even weaker than the card they transformed from. When you do transform a card, however, you get a cool animation. I transform a few more cards, change my deck around a bit, and we head into the Shayal passage on our way to Grail. It is said these sewers are the quickest way into the castle, but it's also the place where monsters hide. Well, let's go in then, shall we? As we explore the sewers, we find one fairy that tells us about a game mechanic that will be especially useful later in the game. When you are in the activation animation of a card, you are invulnerable. You can use this to your advantage to negate powerful skills by boss monsters and strike them instead. The level itself is reasonably straightforward, but there is a somewhat interesting mechanic with doors that you need to open with a button and will then slowly close. Now, the timing is extremely forgiving and not making it in time requires severe slacking, but it is a new exploration mechanic nonetheless. Okay, we make it to the end of the level and we fight the Mind Flayer. As a monster, he is not very interesting. However, his card version has a pretty powerful effect. He allows you to regenerate a few random cards that you have already used, allowing you to keep fighting for longer. This card and cards similar to it will become more and more useful as fights get harder moving forward. Oh, and this card also sells for a lot of gold and is one of the easiest ways to make good gold in the early game to then spend buying cards from good. One other way of getting cards that I did not know about until I had already completed the game is capturing monsters. So, by holding the left trigger and pressing one of the card slots, you can throw the card similar to how you would throw a Pokeball. If you land the card on the monster you want to capture, it deals a little bit of damage. If it kills the monster it lands on, it's captured and you get its card. Excluding some of the bosses, you can capture anything you want. The reason I didn't know this system existed is because this game is from a time where you reading the game manual was expected. I did end up reading the manual after the game was completed, which is how I know it's a thing. However, because the game expects you to have this information, it doesn't teach you this in-game. So while I understand its logic, I do think it's a missed opportunity to not have a small tutorial about it. We make it through the sewers and find our way into the hallways of the castle of Grail. We are met with a surprisingly good looking floor texture and statues adorning the sides of the hallway. A wounded guard tells us that we need to go help the king, so that means our father is here. We then walk up to one of the statues holding a sword, and we get the ability to interact and press a hidden switch. By pressing the switch, we now have moved another guard that was previously blocking our path. The guard that moved was also holding the same sword as the one we found the button on. This is a beautiful way of visually explaining a mechanic. We have no way through, press an easy to find hidden button, and as shown, an identical statue elsewhere is moving. Thankfully, this level is set up in a way where this mechanic comes into play a few times. In the next room, we once again find statues next to a wall, as well as a soldier holding a trident with a passageway right behind him, but he seems to be blocking the door. As we move into the third room, I spot a statue with the exact same trident, and, as expected, there is a hidden button here as well. We press the button, run back to the previous statue, and the doorway has now been opened. We loot the chest, grab a card, and move on. The same puzzle sequence is repeated once more before we make our way into the final room of the level. Surely we have found our father, right? As we walk into the room, a cutscene plays, showing a mystery woman talking to King Zelnan, the castle Grail king, telling him that she has taken his runestone for herself. She then warns us not to try and stop her. What follows is a very interesting boss fight, because for the first time we are not fighting a monster. Although instead of meticulously planned moves, we have tons of monsters on the screen all fighting one another. So I yell, "It's time to duel," and we face her head on. While definitely harder than the random encounters we had previously, she did not pose much of a threat compared to the necromancer we had fought in the graveyard. We beat the mystery woman, but do not quite manage to kill her. She is surprised that we, just like her, are a runestone bearer. She tells us her name is Helena and claims she is our master. Then she tells us we will meet again and leaves the area without explaining anything more. We open the chest that was near the king's throne and find a second runestone. In lore, we don't really know what we need this for. However, in gameplay terms, we get a boost to our overall stats, as well as an increase on both our maximum health as well as our maximum crystals. This means we can now more freely use higher cost cards, as a single high cost card will no longer deplete our resources nearly as often. We then talk to King Zelnan and he tells us that our father came to this castle bearing word of the Black Fog. He tells us that Helena attacked the both of them, but they were overwhelmed and got separated. He then tells us that he hopes our father has escaped the battle, but he doesn't know anything more. We are told the runestone that was held at Castle Grail was not meant to be displaced, but he'd rather we have it than it falling into the wrong hands. He says the other kings must also give us their runestones so that we can keep them safe. So this sounds like an easier said than done kind of situation, because I'm imagining that these artifacts have been in the possession of separated kingdoms for years, and now we are simply going to ask them to hand them over to us and grant us power that they would not be able to stop. I am sure they will oblige, no questions asked, right? Having just gotten this whole load of information, we decide to go confer with Gerd and see what she says. She then tells us that if she were the king, she would have headed to Kendarie Castle, as it is currently the closest remaining castle. I would say that makes perfect sense, so let's head there. Before we continue the story, let's have a bit of a chat about the different types of cards that are in the game. First off, we have very simple attack cards. These cards will act out an attack from where you are facing and don't have a cutscene attached to them. They will generally be a slashing animation in front of you or some sort of projectile. We then have summons that do something on your location. Some of them shoot a projectile similar to the attack ones, but do have an animation allowing your opponent to dodge. There's also endgame ones that deal damage to a certain element and hit the entire battlefield. There are also these summons that I like to call spinners. They have a summoning animation and then they start spinning around you, dealing damage to everything. The one you are seeing right now is my personal favorite and carried me through a lot of fights. Then there are independent summoned cards. You get some plants and skeletons early and they just kind of run around and smack stuff. And I really wanted to make these cards work, as I love the idea of being a summoner when my army of monsters just takes out the enemy. However, the AI is, unfortunately, absolute garbage. And my summons just kept getting stuck and wandering to random places, and they were also easily dodged by faster monsters and just overall did not do much. Some of the summons, however, do not attack and simply provided some sort of defensive or offensive buff as long as they are on the field. These are quite nice to have, as you are not really reliant on the AI to do any work, because as long as they stay alive, they are being effective. Finally, there is also summoned cards that act as traps. You activate them, put them on the battlefield, and wait for a monster to walk under or over them. The trap then springs and deals damage to whatever poor monster interacted with it. You can hold your R button while summoning them to choose where you want to drop them. There are also supposedly bonuses for putting multiple traps together. However, while there was some animation of them kinda sticking together, The traps always felt like they bugged out and did not activate, so I didn't really get to play with this. And I guess there is one final type of card where it's just a restoration effect, restoring some HP or some cards, which is kind of like a summon, but it doesn't really do anything offensive. Alright, on with the story. In order to get to Kendarie Castle, we must cross the Bridge of Sarven. The bridge level is very straightforward as any bridge would be. It's, well, just a very long bridge. At least it does give us the idea that whatever waterway we are crossing is a vast body of water. Overall, there isn't too much to say about this level. However, about halfway through, we do find an interesting puzzle where we have to spin a set of 2 switches either left or right. Moving these 2 switches operates different mechanisms. There's one combination used to get access to a chest, and another one that opens up the path forward. This is the only puzzle in the whole game that required some level of puzzling from my end. Well, besides the one in the graveyard, I suppose, but that honestly was just randomly guessing until you get it right. The bridge puzzle does have one caveat though. Every time you move the switches, it costs you 1 crystal. So, if you keep spamming them left and right, you will at some point run out of crystals. So we cross the entire bridge and find our way to Kendarie Castle, the land of wealth and beauty. The world map description says the Black Fog has not yet reached this place, and we head into the castle. Another cutscene plays, and it starts with the king telling us he has no time for questions and wants us to leave. As we leave, a guard then runs up to us and tells us that the king is not in a good mood because their runestone has been stolen. Well, I guess it can't be as easy as just going to the castles and being gifted the runestones, right? But on a more positive note, why don't we just go steal the runestone from the thief? The guard tells us they managed to chase the thief into a mine, but have yet to retrieve the runestone. Well, I suppose we have nothing better to do than grab a pickaxe, level mining, smith our ore, and rip off some people in Lumbridge. Hold on, that's RuneScape, guys, never mind. It's just, the word rune is in there. I must have gotten confused. My apologies. I guess we'll just go play card games instead. As we head into the mine, we do see some Kendarie warriors who are looking for the thief. But, because they are not super special awesome like us, they haven't been able to locate the thief just yet. We make our way through the cave and run into a boss called the Puppet Master. He says he can smell a runestone somewhere near. I'm sorry, that's just my new cologne. The Puppet Master then realized we have the runestone and says that the enchanter would have killed us sooner or later anyway. Good thing his smell can't tell him that it's actually 2 runestones, and we totally kick his ass. After telling the Puppet Master to get good, FromSoftware style, we open up a chest near us and what do you know? Another runestone! Not quite sure who put it in the chest in the first place. Am I to gather that the Puppet Master stole the rune from Kendarie and then put it in the chest for safekeeping? Only for him to then challenge us to a duel in a winner-takes-all runestones bet? I really can't make anything else of this plot so far. Well, let's head back to Gert once more and tell her about the progress that we have now made. She seems happy that we have found a 3rd runestone and then asks us if we are actually sure that the Puppet Master was talking about the enchanter. She then tells us that the enchanter was referenced in an ancient pagan religious book. When we mention to her that we still haven't found our father, she says there's only one place left where our father might be. So we set out for Castle Wit by crossing Burnden Field first. In the middle of Burnden Field, we find a cool zombie dragon mini-boss and we take it out. We then make our way to the gate of Castle Wit, only to be struck by a surprising sight. Our father is there, battling a giant insect. After we obviously crush the battle, he asks us if it is true that we have the runestones. Upon confirmation, he too tells us that we need to collect all 5 runestones. He says, and I quote, "Go to the temple, there it slumbers, the power." He tells us he loves us and asks us to forgive him for leaving us. He then passes away in our arms as the level completed pop-up quickly moves me away from the chance at feeling emotions, as I have more important things to do like collecting cards. After the emotional scene with our dad, we head into Castle Wit to seek an audience with the prince. We are met with another castle interior that looks somewhat similar to Castle Grail, but does have a different floor. There's also some elevators that we can use to move up and down a floor, and some of them require to be powered up first by finding a switch. Overall, a pretty simple and straightforward level. In one of the side rooms, a guard tells us that we need to activate the switch on the innermost statue. So, we head deeper into the castle and find a statue on the far left with a button on it. Pressing this button opens up a door which then lets us into the throne room. However, it turns out the throne room is mostly empty and only one injured warrior of wit remains. He tells us all of their men are dead and he is soon to follow. He says this is the work of a woman in black. Could it be Helena, the other runestone bearer we met in Castle Grail? The warrior tells us that the prince did in fact manage to escape and fled to Grenfell Church. It also seems likely that the woman in black followed him there. So, let's head there next and see if we can save the prince. The next level is a proper church with benches all around. We have to go around the area and open 4 chests containing 4 colored candles. Once we have collected the blue, yellow, red and green candle, a door in the back opens up that allows us to move deeper into the church. I think this shot of the stairs that you're looking at right now is a good moment to talk about the very limited level design. While the more open areas often fill the screen and give you the feeling that this zone might be bigger than you are seeing, it's areas like these that really showcase the limited level design present in the game. All we see right now is a staircase heading into an extremely simplistic square room. There is no candle on the wall to illuminate the path. There is no floor faintly visible far below. In fact, there is not even a wall present to hang anything on. While you might assume that this was done due to the limitations of the GameCube, I want you to remember that this game came out in the same year we get the likes of Super Mario Sunshine and Metroid Prime, games with much more detail in level design. I can only assume the levels felt this empty because Lost Kingdoms is trying to cover a lot of variety in their biomes. This game has castles, sewers, snow, a bridge, and many more biomes. It feels like they favored quantity over quality when it came to the level design. And while I very much appreciate the sheer variety in the zones, I also believe they swung the pendulum too far into the quantity direction. We find a chest in the far back of the room and get yet another runestone. This means we are now up to 4. Just as we collect the runestone, however, Helena shows up in the doorway and says that we have beaten her to her goal, which is a bit odd considering we were the ones chasing her. I guess she did not possess the insane intelligence required to solve the candle puzzle. Good thing my brain is absolutely enormous and no puzzle can stop me. Helena then claims to have the 5th and final runestone and tells us to meet her at the Colosseum if we want it. So, to the Colosseum we go. As we arrive, we see a short cutscene of Helena seemingly comforting the prince. As she seems to be the game's antagonist, that is a bit of an odd choice. She then jumps down and we immediately fight her. The battle is a mechanical repeat of the battle we had earlier in the castle. She has some new cards, but overall the fight is not any different and we take care of her with relative ease. After beating her, she says she thought she would crush us, but this outcome is in fact for the better. She explains that she was a princess just like us, but seemingly came from a different place. Wherever place she was from also had 5 runestones spread across multiple kingdoms, and her family was tasked with the protection of one of them. It seems like her journey is very similar to ours, but what is this other world she speaks of and why have we never heard of it? She tells us the enchanter then came along and took all 5 runestones from her world. He then held her people hostage and forced Helena to come to our world. While she attempted to fight him, she was unable to best him. Her objective, seemingly, was to get our runestones in a desperate attempt to fight him off herself. But now that she has failed, she asks us to take our runestones and stop the enchanter from whatever evil plan he has got going on. She asks us to forgive her and then passes away. It seems to be a bit of a trend for people to ask us for forgiveness only to then pass away shortly after. Upon her passing, a runestone drops and we claim our 5th and final runestone. We grab the prince to bring him to safety and he shares that he too had a pleasant experience with Helena. It seems she was just trying to do what was best for her world and was no different to us. Now, it is time to finish the job that she could not. As per usual, we return to Gurt and tell her what happened to us. In our conversation with Gurt, we are reminded of something our father told us just before he passed away, that the power was sleeping in the temple. Gurt suggests that there's only one temple he could have been talking about, the temple of Ru Arok, a temple that has stood since the beginning of time. If there's answers anywhere, it must be this place. Once again, Gurt tells us that we can get to this place, but we must first make our way through another level. This approach makes complete logical sense, as traveling the world would require us to go to places. However, the fact that it's always Gurt giving us a specific location and then an in-between location is starting to feel a bit repetitive. We are told we need to go to the lava pits of Mount Jordan and make our way to the temple. At least the aesthetic of the next zone is very much different from anything we have encountered so far. Mount Jordan is, as you would expect, an active volcano. It is quite a distinct design with lava flowing around us and fire spewing up from the ground. While I do enjoy the look overall, I am not a big fan of the color palette in combination with our attempts at finding red fairies. With how extremely saturated the place looks, it is nearly impossible to spot the red fairies in the middle of all the other red set pieces. I do think I found most of them, but it took some serious effort to be able to spot them. We fight a big red fire dragon at the end, and then we make our way to our next destination, the Temple of Ru Arok. So, the Temple of Ru Arok is one of the more interesting levels in this game. Not because of its basic level design, as it's a simple matter of collecting 2 pickups from chests, putting them on pedestals and opening the door, but because this level contains both a really fun design, as well as probably one of the biggest mistakes the game has made overall. Alright, now that the stage has been set, let's talk about the Ru Arok Temple. After opening up the door to the boss of the level, but before entering the actual boss fight, there are also pathways left and right. On the left side are a green and brown door, while on the right side there's a blue and red door. For anyone who has at least 2 working brain cells, this should immediately make you think of the element of the cards we use. When interacting with one of these doors, it also talks about its associated element, but you can't seem to open them. One of the red fairies in the center room also mentions these doors taking you to faraway places. Well, the way these doors work is that you need to prove your mastery of the element by owning at least 20 unique cards of that element. And when I first arrived at this level, I did not have any of the 4 elements at that stage. This means I was unable to open the door, and in my mind that was fine, because I could just return here once I met the requirements and treat it as post-game content. Well, about that. You actually can't replay a level once you have completed it, and without completing it you can't move forward. So there is no practical way to get more cards for the doors without moving further along in the story. So I used the only solution I had and completed the entire remainder of the game before returning here. Because you can replay levels, but only after finishing the final level. I'll leave the mystery of these doors here for now, and I will return to them at a later point in the video. So, what about the actual boss of the temple then? As we move up the stairs, we get a small in-game cutscene and a giant black dragon spawns. It says we dare defy its master, and that we will now die. Well, just like most bosses, he doesn't pose that much of a threat, and we take him out. Him being fairly stationary and easily hit by my skills doesn't help him much either. At this point, I talk to Gurt again and notice that we can apparently unlock some side quests that can give us some additional cards. Now, these side quests are not really anything special, and they are all very similar to the levels we had before. There also isn't any real story relevance to them. There is one cool boss in the Grumtool Desert though, where we have to beat the boss multiple times, as it just keeps running away whenever it gets a low HP. Also, there is this rather long ladder that we have to climb up and down. It's the only long ladder section in the entire game, so behold, climbing. There's also a snowy zone which adds absolutely nothing new to the game, but once again is a new aesthetic. I find it rather curious that they have an entire biome hidden away in a missable side quest. I can't help but feel like the development time was better spent on fleshing out the main levels. Having now completed the side quests and not being able to interact with the elemental doors, there's only one way to go, and that is forward. We have now unlocked access to Brock Black, which is described as the dark castle of the enchanter. One interesting thing about this level is that all the monsters are neutral. This means that we can't abuse a single element and use its type effectiveness. I find this to be a great idea, as this means we can build a deck using all elements available and create the ultimate deck. In my mind, that is much better than forcing us into a particular element. Well, it seems we are getting close to the enchanter, so let's head in. The level starts us off with a closed gate in front of us and a pathway to the right. So we follow the path and see two stowed away chests with their gate closed. Well, guess I'll return here later. Slightly further up ahead is a new exploration mechanic we haven't seen yet. I do quite like it when games keep some new mechanics for the later levels. We interact with weird eye-looking things and they teleport us to the platform right behind them. You can jump around and find some chests on these platforms, and eventually you will find the Stone of Darkness on one of these platforms. We can now return to the start of the level and use this Eye of Darkness to open up the gate. One interesting thing about this level is the amount of trial and error that is involved with you jumping around the platforms. While you are doing this, you have a chance to run into random encounters, and do keep in mind that you are slowly burning through your cards. This is the only level where you really want to bring card restoration as a part of your deck, as it becomes a war of attrition. As we make our way back once again, we walk past the closed off chests, but to our surprise we are suddenly locked in and forced to battle. Fortunately, this also opened up the doors that were blocking the chests, allowing us to grab some additional loot. Back at the start of the level, we use the Stone of Darkness to open up the door and move forward. We then get a few more hops across platforms and find ourselves in a cross-shaped room. A red fairy then tells us that we need to go deal with the two bosses in the two side rooms, and we clear them with relative ease. Once again, the fights themselves are not too hard, but the card depletion keeps burning down our deck, and we need to make sure that we keep regaining cards in combat. After beating the two side rooms, the door in front of us opens up. We get to loot 3 chests, refill our health, input some more cards we found into our deck, and step into the middle of the room. A cutscene now plays, showing the enchanter sitting on a throne with a weird eyeball floating up above. We learn his name is Talnos, and he welcomes us. He offers to solve this without violence and asks us to be his queen. He must have seen the look in my eyes, because he immediately backtracks and says it's unfortunate that we won't comply. He wants to claim our runestones and add them to the ones he collected from Helena. This would make him the most powerful being in the world. Well, I guess the only thing to do is to fight him. Runestone bearer versus runestone bearer. Here we go. This battle is tougher than any battle we have fought before. He has hard-hitting cards and can take off a lot of your health if you're not careful. He has a good amount of health and doesn't have any elemental weakness. Once again, card sustain is incredibly important when trying to take him down. This fight is also where I got extremely annoyed with the fact that a lot of cards have a pretty long activation animation. A lot of them remove your control and force you to watch a few seconds as the card is being used. While the animation is cool the first couple of times, they became very annoying very quickly. Especially since he keeps spamming the same ones over and over again. And if you do happen to lose to him, you will have to restart the entire level. Fortunately, I beat him at my second attempt and was ready to celebrate my victory. But oh boy, was I wrong. We defeat Thalnos and suddenly, he seems to start losing control. He says that his body cannot contain the power. What power is he speaking of? Well, it turns out Thalnos was nothing more than a vessel for the god of destruction. He asks us if we were sent here by his sister, the goddess of creation. We are then teleported up into the air onto a platform. He says we have been deceived, as we, a mere human, cannot defeat a god. This fight is quite tough, and I had to attempt this fight about 10 times before finally taking him down. He has the ability to nuke you down to single-digit HP with a single hit. At this point, I also realized that my deck was not built well to deal with him. I had a lot of card regeneration and some summons to play with. However, he one-shot my summons, and since we started this fight with a full deck and full HP, my card generation did not help. I desperately kept dropping cards, hoping to fight more damage to take him out. He's quite tanky and hits very hard. Oh, and keep in mind that this boss fight is an extension to the level. This means that if you die, you will have to replay the base level, fight Talnos the Enchanter again, and then attempt the boss. I will admit to having used save states for this fight, as I did not want to go through everything again over and over again to attempt to kill. After a lot of attempts, we do kill him. He seems shocked that he was bested by a mere mortal and is impressed at how far our world has come, as in the past he would have been able to kill us with ease. He says there is no more place for him in this world and that we are its masters now. The god of destruction then leaves and the goddess of creation talks to us. She says she too must depart our world. The world gets whole again, the level ends, and we get the God of Destruction card. This really cool card brings every single creature, friend and foe alike, including our character, to 1 HP. It's a bit unfortunate that we already finished the hardest fight of the game, and we don't really have a purpose for it anymore. I do wonder though if the God of Destruction card can also near one hit the God of Destruction boss fight. I did not bother to test that, but I'm actually quite curious now. After getting the card, we get a rolling text screen just like we got at the very start. The people awoke to find the black folk gone. The land has returned to the way it was and people continue their lives like they had before. The world, however, has been changed. Where previously there was void, there was now land. Two lands became one and prospered. The two worlds have once again been united. We then get a cutscene showing the princess taking up her throne and becoming the Queen of Alanya, still holding the runes and presumably becoming the protector of balance. Alright, so the final fight is finished and the credits roll. However, we are not quite done just yet. We now have the ability to replay any of the levels to see if we can get a better grade, farm cards, get experience, and, most importantly, we can now return to the temple of Ru Arok. So, I returned to the temple and played the level 4 times. Unfortunately, every time you open a door and interact with the element, you get thrown out as you unlock a new level to play. So I played 4 times and unlock all the optional elemental zones. These zones are clearly meant as a way to power up before actually fighting the final boss. They are all single element zones and thus are hard countered by the opposing element. In the woods we fight the Tiger King and get his card. In the Earth Pyramid we fight the turtle and get his card. We go to the volcano and get the Phoenix card, and finally we go to the water zone and we get the Blue Eyes White Dragon card. The Blue Dragon card. The 4 cards are called the Sacred Beasts, and I was initially planning on making a joke here regarding the 3 boss monsters from the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX also being called the Sacred Beasts. But this game came out 2 years before Yu-Gi-Oh! GX started, so I guess Lost Kingdoms did not do the copying here. These Sacred Beasts are all high cost cards that would have definitely helped out massively in our fight against the God of Destruction. But unfortunately, due to the way this game was structured, getting them all was not something that was easily done, as we had no idea how to get them without an external guide, and I definitely did not have the required amount of cards when I came to the temple initially. The bonus levels do mention some very interesting lore. Apparently there aren't just 2 gods in Destruction and Creation, but there's also a third one in Balance. And this god of balance split the world into 2 to prevent the gods from interacting. This is what split our world from the one Helena was from. So that was the entire game. Now let's go back to the question I posed at the very start of this video. Was this game only good in my memories and was it heavily carried by the nostalgia goggles? Or was it actually a good game? I would have to say it is somewhere in between. The game has a really strong foundation. The battle system, albeit not the best flowing one, is very unique and it could work very well with a bit more polish. The variety in the zones was incredibly high for its playtime and I really enjoyed going through the cards and seeing what I could come up with. The sound design was pretty decent, but I was a bit sad that the entire game used only 1 battle track. Because the game is only about 6 to 7 hours long, it didn't bother me that much. But had this game been longer, I would have probably turned it off at some point. The levels, however, felt very similar in the actual layout and had no more complexity 1 hour in than 5 hours in. The AI for summoned creatures being absolutely horrible and the plot feeling somewhat weak and shallow definitely did not help this game. I am curious to see how the sequel might have changed these areas, as I have not played that game at all. However, if this video does well, I am totally up to covering its sequel as well. I do believe the core systems in this game and the ideas it presents are really unique, and with better execution and more polish, I would absolutely play a modern version if it ever does come out. Alright, my hands are cramping writing this script, so I need to wrap up this video. And also my throat is extremely sore because I recorded this entire thing in pretty much one sitting. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do let me know what you think of this format, as it's by far my biggest time investment for a single video on my channel. I am really looking forward to hearing your likes and dislikes on this format. And guys, as always, have a great day.